If you want your Salesforce users to know how to use the platform, you will need a training strategy for them. But what if you don't have time? What if they're not motivated? How do you make sure that the training sticks with them and doesn't just end up collecting dust on their computer or in their inbox? This podcast interview with Heather Black discusses the techniques for creating a successful Salesforce training plan, including how to put it into action and what you should think about while developing your own. Listeners will learn how to create an effective learning experience that will help employees be more productive from day one.
Welcome to the Brainiate Show, where we talk about all things Salesforce, sharing the coolest features, solutions, and best practices to turn you into a Salesforce rock star. Here's your host, former attorney turned Salesforce consultant and trainer, David Gillard.
Heather Black, welcome to the Brainiate Show. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. It's great to be here with you, David.
I am thrilled to have you, especially because we are talking about one of my favorite topics, which is training in the Salesforce ecosystem. Because honestly, I think this topic really gets both of us excited, whether we're talking about training of admins or training of end users. It's empowering to teach others how to take their career to another level, no?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you want to introduce Salesforce to them and tell them all the amazing stuff it can do and get them excited about the bigger picture, not the thinking about, oh, this means more admin for me in my day job.
Exactly. So for folks who are not familiar with you and who you are and what you do in the Salesforce ecosystem, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself, about your career journey? Tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. So Heather Black, CEO of Supermums. I started my Salesforce journey back in 2010. I was running a non-profit at the time and started using Salesforce to manage all the stakeholders that we had and became that accidental admin. Found my techie side, loved configuring the system to manage my non-profit, and got the light bulb idea of going, okay, I could implement Salesforce for other non-profits. And that coincided with me wanting to find a more flexible, well-paid career as I was starting a family. So as a new mum, I became a Salesforce consultant, working 3 days a week, earning a good wage, implementing Salesforce for non-profits. And roll on to now, I've overseen over 700 projects and had a consultancy team that have worked alongside me. Now I focus all my time on running Supermums, launched Supermums in 2016, and we upskill mums in Salesforce skills, both at the start of their career as admins, but also with consultancy skills, coaching skills, and marketing cloud. And we've accidentally went global and have now supported over 500 people to train up.
Amazing. It's super impressive. I talked about a moment ago, the impact that it has on people's careers, especially for moms who are juggling responsibilities at home, trying to advance their careers, exploring. And one of the things I love about the Salesforce ecosystem is regardless of what niche industry, a certain geographic area, niche industry background you want to focus on, it just provides so many options for people. So congratulations on all of the work that you do and having such a positive impact on so many families. It's not only people, it's families.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's very rewarding to see everybody, and you feel like a proud mum when all these trainees go out and they get their jobs and they get their promotions. And we've got our anniversary coming up next month, and we're inviting one of the mums from the very first cohort to come along. And it's just going to blow everybody away about her journey, when she is now as a director for a company. Yeah, absolutely. It's very rewarding, but there's so much opportunity in this sector that we've just got to get more and more people into it.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about end user training. And I think we both find that there are so many instances where not only small organizations, but also large organizations with global logos that everyone is familiar with, they do a lot of things incredibly well. But when it comes to end user training their own team members on how to use all sorts of internal systems and follow processes, let alone in the Salesforce ecosystem, they get it so wrong. It's just shocking. Let's talk about those scenarios where organizations, they put together budgets for Salesforce projects and they do not have a single line item for training. Why is this problematic?
It is a problem, isn't it? Because then people won't know how to use a system and it all goes wrong because people haven't been nurtured through it. And what I've seen quite often on projects is that all the build gets prioritized and the design. There's no budget left for training at the end. So I would challenge listeners to think about how you can flip the coin on that. Like, how do you plan your training strategy up front and educate the client? So I suppose what I'd like to share with you today is how I teach my trainees on my consultancy skills course, how to put a training package together, how to communicate that to the client to make them understand what's really important and make sure that it is a line item and to make sure that there is enough budget reserved and parked for training. Because the problem is that you can build a system, but if nobody uses it, then the whole thing is a waste of time.
Huge waste of time. And then later on, a lot of times what I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, they will blame the people who managed the Salesforce project. They'll blame the
Exactly.
technology. They'll blame everyone but themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is why our role is to educate people, right? Because they don't know. A lot of clients will work with the teams, don't know what is required in a Salesforce system or a project to make it work. So as Salesforce consultants or professionals managing the project, maybe there is some blame there if we haven't educated them on what is needed. It's definitely an education piece. And I think it's really important for sales professionals to understand what training needs to include. Not everybody has a background in training. They don't know necessarily themselves what good training is. And hopefully we can shed a little bit of light on that in the session today.
Exactly. And honestly, to some extent, the marketing, the very strong marketing that Salesforce does out in the world, one of the key takeaways is it's a system that's easy to use. And a lot of times I find that Salesforce account executives with the best of intentions, they are harping on it's easy to use, which sort of reinforces this concept of training really shouldn't be a problem because the system should be intuitive and it's easy to use. But they've customized it and it's as easy as it might be to use. An iPhone is easy to use, but for someone who's never seen an iPhone before, it's not going to go very well. Someone needs to show them how to use it still. I agree with you. Part of the responsibility is shared with the consultant or the Salesforce admin to make sure that end user training is somehow reflected as part of the overall project plan.
Yeah, I'm reserved and earmarked there, but there's lots of components to that, right?
Absolutely. So let's talk about how this can actually be done. So some of our listeners might be working at organizations where end users have not been trained in forever. And now they're starting to realize that, okay, this might be problematic. What do you suggest is the best way to start formulating an end user training strategy for their team?
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts. What's the perfect training strategy? I think it would be perfect. Nothing's ever perfect, but I think there's quite a considered approach to this. And I'll share some of the tools that I use because when I teach the coaching skills to Salesforce professionals, it's really about understanding how people learn. You're going to have a whole team of people, right, basically, that you need to teach to use a system. And the first thing is getting their buy-in. So you need to be working with them to say, why do they need to learn this? So particularly if you're starting with a load of people that are half-baked using a system, you need to come up with a communication plan that's why is this important to you? And to break this down, I'm going to talk about something called the VARC model. And this is about 4 different learning styles. And everybody has a preferred learning style typically, but you would have a combination of different ones. So with VARC, it stands for visual, auditory, audio digital, which is read write, and kinesthetic type learning styles. Now, if I put that into practice, what does that mean when we talk about this topic? When you're getting buy-in to training and encouraging people to think about why do I need to learn this, a visual learner will want to see what it's all about. They will want to see why this is important to them, maybe through a taster video or through a presentation. Whereas somebody who's auditory learner will want to say what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. So they're more interested in understanding what, when, why, how. With a read-write person, they want to know why they are doing this. So why should they be learning Salesforce? What's the business case for it? What's the purpose behind it? And then with kinesthetic, they want to know the examples of other people that are using it. So if I was to kick off a training session or to say we're going to embark on a training session, my introduction paragraph would be, as a Salesforce consultant, say paragraph, but your introductory sort of pitch to them to say, we're going to engage on supporting with Salesforce and getting you up to speed with that. The reason for this is that Salesforce is the number one CRM platform. It's used by thousands of companies around the world. It's best on the market. It's used by all of our competitors. We need to step up because we're going to get behind the times if we don't use it. It's going to help us achieve X, Y, Z, maybe in terms of turnover, improved efficiency, all those little points that might resonate with different people in different ways. So that's a business case point. We are going to do this training over the next 5 weeks or months, and this is what we're going to be covering in that training. So just in that pitch, you've covered all the points that sort of tackle kinesthetic, read, write, auditory, visual to pique their interest. Now, what's an important other sort of point here also is that you need to communicate this in at least 3 different ways. So you might deliver it at a team meeting, you might put it in an email, an internal email, you might then deliver it almost one-on-one as well, or as part of another meeting that happens. But normally people need to see and hear things 3 times in order for it to sink in. So that's the first bit about why you'd approach it. The second would be about how you then deliver the training. So if we're thinking about those 4 styles again, you've got to create enough budget, going back to that budget piece, to make sure that there's enough budget in there to cover the 4 different learning styles. Because if you just prepare a training manual and you send that out to people, that isn't going to work for those 4 different learning styles. You're going to get people that drop off the radar. So your perfect combination of putting together training is the training manual will still be important with screenshots, for example. You would want to then deliver a live run through training session of running through the system as a demo run through. Ideally, then you'd record that video so you can run through it again, or people who have been in that live session can press record play and go back and forth with it and run through things in their own time. And quite often you might get the video all broken up into little chunks so you can segment it. I'll talk about that in a minute, but embed it within your system. And then kinesthetic learners like to play with the system. So you'd want to put together a user script, you'd want to set them up in the sandbox, you'd want them to be able to then work through the system process in their own time using the user script. And ideally, I say in their own time, but the best scenario is where you're actually stood around them or you're on a screen with them where you can see them doing it in practice and working through. So if they get stuck, you're there to support them and they're not going to lose interest and do it. So that covers off your 4 learning styles, and that's what you need to have within a budget.
This is fantastic. And going to the point that you made earlier, which is that just sending off a document is not the right way to do it because of the learning styles. And honestly, it's just not even practical. I find so funny in a way is that even trying to put together end user Salesforce training in a document format, it's so not practical because the system is changing so often. And there are so many levels of granularity that you need to get to. That document is going to be hundreds, if not thousands of pages long, too overwhelming for anyone to go through.
Mhm.
And as soon as you hit save, it's outdated.
I know the things that I've seen that I think replace the traditional manual with screenshots, and I'm completely in alignment. Somebody needs to be managing that process if you're going to have a manual that needs to be updated. The ways that we piloted with clients is using something like knowledge articles and embedding them like as part of the Lightning pages and page layouts, or using more sophisticated tools like Improved Apps, which is an embedded training solution, or even adding training into paths and using the training embedded in that. Because actually I did a whole manual. We had a manual for a client done. And we were like, actually, all of this is exactly what could be put in the text in a path. So why are we even bothering with a manual when it could be actually embedded in the system? And I think that's really the way to go. Salesforce now with all the Lightning pages and the ability to add text or features and these third-party apps that you can add in, and Salesforce has introduced in-app training as well. They're all the features that you want to be using that sort of hit the notes of people who AD or read write, they need the text, not just videos, but you can embed videos in some of these solutions too.
You can embed videos, whether it's truly embedding the video where the user does not need to go even off of the screen to watch the video, or simply embed links to the video directly on the pages. And to your point, Salesforce is releasing more and more features related to like in-app guidance within that entire realm. But even before Salesforce released the in-app guidance features, simply having Lightning components, let alone Lightning components with dynamic visibility, where you can have on all account screens, on all opportunity records, on all lead records for specific types of users, or you could even have it for specific types of records. In other words, a lead record that has the following criteria on it, then display this Lightning component. And that Lightning component, to the point you made before, could contain the text itself of here are the steps that you should be following. It could be a set of hyperlinks to a PDF, abbreviated PDF documents that are more focused just for, you don't want to send them to a 400-page PDF, or a link to a video that walks them through the use case of how to use some of these features. So to your point, leveraging the native technology that Salesforce provides is probably the easiest part. It's creating the content and updating the end user training content and being on top of it and making sure that end users are aware that it's available and how to find it is probably the hardest part out of all of this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody needs to hold the baby going forward, and that's the biggest piece. And I said to clients at the beginning, who's going to be the in-house Salesforce admin, the champion? Explain to them the 4 roles of an awesome admin, like what are the tasks of that person? Hopefully that's not one person because there's a lot to have on their shoulders, but who's going to manage the training is one of those roles of an awesome admin. Sort of when updates are made, how does that have to influence and change any training material? So there's that aspect to it for sure. Somebody needs to hold that baby. They need to be considered in their approach of how they're going to do it. Then how do they disseminate that training to people as part of team meetings, etc. And one of the things, again, just another training option is we have done this with some clients is have an LMS system. So you can track that people have done training because, I've also heard those sort of comments of, I don't know how the system works. And then you can see that they've not done any of the training. You have to watch the training to know how the system works, right? So it's a little bit of a big brother quality assurance piece. And I think that's what's quite good about the Trailhead tracker as well, is that you can see what trailheads people have done and that's in quizzes. So there is that piece. There's lots of ways that you can embed training. I think it's being mindful of making sure that you're accommodating the 4 different learning styles. But equally, how do you track that somebody's completed the training? How do you disseminate ongoing training? There needs to be a strategy for that.
Absolutely. And since we're right now focusing on the logistics of the how to go about putting together that training methodology and implementing it, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how an organization can start thinking about the end user training at the onset of even gathering the business requirements before any configuration is even done. What advice do you have for organizations on how they can keep end user training in mind, even at the earliest onset of an enhancement request? Let's even call it that, not even a project, an enhancement.
Okay. So having just delivered my consultancy skills course, we talked about communication strategies amongst all the stakeholders. So we were looking at how do you engage an exec sponsor? And it's an education piece, right? Because an exec sponsor has probably never done managing a CRM project before. They might have done, but quite often they haven't. And they don't know what's expected of them. And so I think there is that piece where as a Salesforce professional, we have to be saying to the exec sponsor, right, let's talk about training. That's one element of conversation with them. And this is what we need to be considerate of. And the Salesforce professional needs to say, these are the different learning styles. We need to make sure we accommodate for all of those learning styles by delivering training, what could be X, Y, Z. So videos, user scripts, run-throughs, live demos, etc. Manuals or in-app products, whichever way you go down. That's what needs to be delivered in order to maximize adoption. And given that we've got all these people to train, that's going to take this many hours. Because if you do that, the exec sponsor really understands the business case for investing in training. And Salesforce is all about the business case. So I think it's really important to explain why training needs to be delivered in a certain way, and explain the learning styles, explain what you would recommend. Because as you mentioned, David, at the beginning, the blame can fall back on you. But if you've communicated your business case and explained it to them in verbally and also in a written document, make sure that they have different learning styles as well, right? With a business case,
That's right.
your exec sponsor has their own learning style. You want to communicate it in writing, you want to present the business case, you want to verbalize it to them and say, this is what I'd recommend for training. I think we need to earmark this amount of budget for training for it. That's the way that you want to approach your role as a Salesforce professional, to make sure that you've done the best you can do. If they then turn around and say, you know what, no, we don't want that, we just want a manual, then it's out of your hands because you covered your back, you had your recommendation, you suggested it.
Yeah, I love that approach. And thank you for sharing that insight. Also, I found that when it comes to actually putting together the training material, referencing back to the pain points that were articulated when we're doing the business requirements gathering, to the point that you made earlier about communication, that pain needs to be referenced. The use case of, here's how you guys have been doing it up until now. Here's the pain that was shared with us. As a result, we did A, B, and C to improve the Salesforce configuration. And now let's take a look at the newer rendition of that business process. So it's really not about, here's how we've updated Salesforce. It's, here's how your pain has been eliminated. We're going to show you how it's done in Salesforce, but it's really about the business process and how we've taken that pain away from you and hopefully introduced a more streamlined, hopefully even automated process to make the team more efficient, hopefully make the team more happier, and hopefully turn them into evangelists and a more productive team, then not only see the ROI in utilizing Salesforce, but also seeing the value in having that training, even if the training is just a 15-minute walk through a video. It does not necessarily have to be a painful, long, several hours or several days session, depending on what enhancement is being introduced. And that light bulb goes off. And I love seeing that happen. To me, it's releasing the new feature to the end users when referencing back, here's how you've been doing it up until now, and here's what we did as a response. Problem, solution, here you go, give me feedback.
Yeah, and it's interesting, that paints another thought for me, actually, David, because I talked about it also, the carrot and stick approach, right? So the carrot is the business benefits you're going to get, or the personal benefits you're going to get from this training and using the system. So that absolutely. The stick approach, and it doesn't have to be like pushing people up a hill, but the other kind of piece that I think needs to go in training material is being really clear about the new business rule and actually communicating, this is the way that we're now going to work. And obviously a business manager can communicate that, kicking off a new training. And that's the other thing I've always said, is that as a Salesforce admin, you don't want to be, you can deliver the training, but you want the manager to be saying, this is now the way that we're going to work, guys. I'm going to be here talking through the training material. I've got my Salesforce admin assistant supporting with the technical side. But this is now the way that we're going to work. And that's great as part of the initial training session. But those business rules about how business needs to be conducted, i.e. you're no longer using a spreadsheet. This is the information that needs to be populated here and here, needs to be really articulated within any training material that gets produced as well, to make sure everybody's clear on the new expectations, that, there's no deviation from that. And it's a stick with just really clear expectations, because people want clear expectations, don't they, about what's expected of them. So I think that carrot and stick approach within training is important in a nice, fluffy way.
100%. And it does tie it right back into the why. Here's why we are doing this. And sometimes the new way of operating is because sometimes it's because of an internal business decision. A lot of times it's because of some external forces, and the external forces could be changes within the industry, changes within the geographic region. It could be changes from legal or legislation compliance perspective, where unfortunately, look, we hate it, but here are the new laws that we must comply with. And therefore, we need to start tracking the following pieces of information, or we need to start getting the following types of approvals documented. So as much as we hate it, this is what we're stuck with. But here's how we can do it in a way that is as painless as possible using the technology that we're leveraging, which is Salesforce.
Absolutely.
So earlier you mentioned utilizing an LMS, a learning management system, which I think is absolutely brilliant. And for those organizations that are familiar with the concept of utilizing an LMS, let alone that they already have some type of LMS in place or My Trailhead, also absolutely fantastic. Another very similar approach that I've seen when working with clients and doing the end user training is very often my clients will ask me to, and I often chuckle when they initially ask me this, is to assign homework assignments for their team because they want to make sure, because in the end, it's not so much about have they actually watched or consumed the content, but do they actually understand it? Because even if we're talking in a pre-COVID world, classroom style, end user training, people are coming to the room, they're keeping their chairs warm. They're making believe they're paying attention, but they're actually on Facebook all day long, and they're not paying attention whatsoever, and they are totally clueless. They can say, I checked off the box, I was in the room. But by giving them a homework assignment, it actually forces them to, going back to the point you made earlier of learning by doing, it forces them to do it, whether they are consuming the content and learning it by reading that PDF or seeing it in person or watching the video. What are your thoughts on having sort of these homework assignments for the team?
No, I think they're a really good idea because actually you want to make sure that somebody's understood it and they get it and to provide that one-to-one mentoring. So I think that's where some people are reflective learners as well. So you can't just do a one-day training, then go, oh, they've learnt it. Some people will need their hand held. They'll need to see where they've gone right or wrong. We do that with a lot of our trainees on our Superman courses. We have mentors that oversee their work and support them and check they've done their homework. And yeah, I think it's a great idea. And it requires an investment of time. But then again, it goes back
Yes.
to you want people to use a system. If you spent thousands of pounds on a system, you need to invest in this level of support at the end. And also, I've seen some of my clients, they've really got hooked on Trailhead. And there's a bit of debate, we had a bit of debate earlier around Trailhead can work for some clients depending on the how off the shelf Salesforce is versus not. You know, if they're learning reports and dashboards, then, you know, yes, Trailhead can help. But actually, some teams have got very competitive, getting all the badges, they love it. So actually, a bit of gamification helps too.
For sure. All right, so we've talked about the why and we've talked about the logistical, the how. And of course, there's a ton more that we could have unpacked on both of those topics. Let's talk a little bit about the when. So let's assume that an organization has structured their Salesforce rollout project with proper end user training. Are they done? Or is there some type of ongoing maintenance strategy? And we've hinted about this earlier where Salesforce is constantly changing. So what type of ongoing effort is needed and how frequently do you think that should be done?
Within any organization with a Salesforce instance, you want a center of excellence. And the center of excellence is responsible for overseeing like the ongoing roadmap and functions of features. Now, as part of the infrastructure of that, though, you would want a series of Salesforce champions in each department. And the Salesforce champions are, you know, have a little bit of kudos to their job title, an extra feature. And hopefully they're people, well, they would be people that are excited by Salesforce, but it's not their day job. But they're the ones that really want to pick up on where there's problems in the team or where there's new requirements and frustration still. They will then sort of collect their own, they do their business analysis process, do a little bit of a backlog. And these Salesforce champions should be then feeding into a centralized Salesforce technical team, be that solo admin and from that point, there might be changes that get done and it will get prioritized by the center of excellence and come back down. then there needs to be that training journey back down. So traditionally, I was taught by Salesforce, and I think this is another sort of key takeaway. One thing that's stuck in my mind from the very early days is it's a train the trainer approach. You want to be training people to be trainers, but having said that, if one of your people you've trained leaves, you don't want all the knowledge to be stuck in their head. So making sure you've got the right training, resources, and infrastructure around them is really important. Your ideal layout is that the Salesforce technical team, be it as I say, a solo admin or a wider team, empowers people within departments to be the Salesforce champions. And that's the trainer element. And the Salesforce champions within the departments will then train any team members in their department around any changes or updates that are being made. And hopefully, say the manager would have some involvement in that. The Salesforce champion might be the manager, or it might be a different person, but if they're going ahead with this approach of these changes have been made, this is now the way that you need to think about things, and that's delivered locally within a team. So that's your ideal scenario, in that training isn't down to one person. It's very much localized within teams and departments, but you want to make sure that the training resources, be it training products or manuals or videos and things like that, are all updated. And that might be a centralized function that supports the Salesforce champions that is done and updated when changes are made. So then the Salesforce champion can go and deliver the training with new updated resources and management. When you have a proper center of excellence in place, you've got a very formulaic process for tracking all the changes, making sure that prioritized, making sure there's a business case for all of those things. And that you take into effect that, okay, these changes are happening. Okay, what does that impact? And one of those impacts will be training material. Okay, great. And right, we'll get the training material, we've done. Cascade that down to the team, and then they manage it from there on in. That's your perfect world. I'm sure many people don't have that perfect world, but that's what you'd be striving for.
By the way, is fantastic because what you're suggesting is by having the appropriate structure and lines of communication in place, it allows for organizations to organically respond to changes that are coming in from within the organization. And when appropriate action is needed for anyone to not only implement new enhancements, introduce new enhancements into the Salesforce environment, but also respond appropriately with end user training needs. Because it might be that there are features that are already in place natively in Salesforce, but have never been needed by the organization. They're already available on the screen, but nobody has been trained on how to use them. But now there's a need to start training them. Let's take list views, for example. List views are there whether we like them or not. And I freaking love list views. But it could be that for whatever reason, with the initial training, there was no need to train people on how to create and edit their own list views. But now, without even introducing a new Salesforce configuration update, it's simply responding to the business needs by training people on how to use features that are already there. So it's not about having a strict scheduled cadence of training, but the organic responsiveness within the organization to the training needs that arise.
Yeah, I think that's what you get by the localization of a Salesforce champion. They really have the finger on the pulse of what everybody's doing in their team and department, and can flag where the bubbles of things. Whereas if training is all centralized, they don't sit within departments every day. So you need those eyes and ears and a Salesforce team infrastructure. There should never be a solo admin, right? In an organization, there should never be one person interested and engaged with Salesforce. There should be an exec sponsor. There should be a project manager, an admin, Salesforce champions. You've got a whole Salesforce team really within it.
Amazing. So, call to action. Folks are listening to this podcast and we've engaged their curiosity and their need for focusing on end user training and putting together a strategy internally within the organization to take corrective action as it relates to end user training. What are the best next steps for Salesforce professionals listening to this podcast that want to start moving in the right direction? What should they do next?
Okay. So I think just to pull together some of the key points that we've talked about is one, consolidate what the strategy should include and communicate that to your exec sponsor if you want to roll out a training strategy. So again, I explain the learning styles and the different approach to training and what a compilation of training would include to make sure that you're engaging different people in different ways. So put together your plan, summarize what we've spoken about in this session today. I think the reflective nature of what I've taught today is, I think coaching tools are very powerful. Coaching tools and techniques, of which learning styles is one of them, is a very powerful tool. And communication techniques are so important for Salesforce projects beyond just the technical skills. How do I do a flow, which is everybody's favorite question at the moment. How do I do flow? It's coming. Oh my God. But the question is also, how do I communicate? How do I get people on board with training and things like that? I teach coaching tools and techniques at Supermom. So if people are interested in some of those softer skills and have understood and learned a lot around, if people like what I've shared today, then you might be interested in learning more coaching tools and techniques that can really empower your users, empower you to speak to your exec sponsors with more clarity about what it is that you need to do and how and when, and get their buy-in to it. I think there's a very considered approach to this. Training isn't just a training manual, as we've discovered today. There's a much more of an in-depth process and approach that needs to be taken in order for you to be the most successful Salesforce professional that you can be, and for organizations to have really great adoption strategies and get everybody on board with it. So yeah, I wish everybody best of luck with their training going forward.
Love it. Heather, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your advice for the Salesforce community. I'm looking forward to having you again on the podcast in the future. Have a great day. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, David. Lovely to be here.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Brainy8 Show. Make sure to subscribe on Spotify, Audible, or Apple Podcasts so that you don't miss any future episodes. Don't forget to check out the show notes where you'll find links to any resources mentioned. If there's a topic you would like to hear about on an upcoming episode, drop me a note on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, and have an awesome day.